come back later and show you guys how it's doing, and you'll get to watch the progress of it. Or the failure. We'll see. I'm nervous. I'm so nervous about this.
Hey, what's up, everybody? John here, and things are starting to smell a little sour in the kitchen. So, okay, what are we doing?
We are attempting to make sauerkraut for the very first time. We're going to ferment it for several weeks. So, I have never done this before, and I know what I'm supposed to do, and I have my recipe, but it might be a little clunky because I've never done it before.
So Kelly's getting out the some of the cabbage that got harvested from our garden last week, and that's what she's gonna make this. What are we making? That's what she's gonna make the sauerkraut out of.
So we are going to be fermenting the kraut in wide mouth quart mason jars. I'm gonna hopefully have enough cabbage for at least 3, possibly 4. I'm got a little more cabbage than I might need by weight, so we'll see how it goes. I've got 4 jars, and the idea is that so basically sauerkraut is a fermented food, and when you ferment, you have to keep the kraut and the kraut submerged beneath the brine. You're gonna make a brine and then push the cabbage into it, and you have to keep it submerged beneath that. So in order to do that, I think traditionally, like, kraut is made in big crocks, and there's weights that go in it and all of that to keep the kraut, or to keep the cabbage below the water line. But since I'm doing it in jars in a very small batch, the method that I have read about is to use these little baby 4-ounce mason jars. So essentially, we're going to chop the cabbage up, add salt to it to make the brine, push it down into the jar, and then you add the little jar on top. And the recipe that I've looked at and I'm going to use says once you add that jar, you will use just a regular lid. You could use a canning lid if you had it, but I have some regular lids, and that you'll put the jar in there and you'll put the lid on top loosely to let the gases come out of the kraut, but to keep things in the atmosphere from getting in, bugs and dust and all that sort of stuff. So that's what we're going to attempt to do. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so these they've already were rinsed before we put them in storage, and we store them with these damp paper towels just to help keep moisture in them. So I'm not going to worry too much about rinsing them unless I see something that's on them, because like I said, they were already rinsed before we stored them. And the particular recipe that I'm using also calls for putting something on top of the cabbage to help hold it down from any floaties coming up above the water, because you do not want anything to come above the water. That will cause it to mold. And one of the things they talk about is you can just take a cabbage leaf and kind of cut it to the size of the jar and put that on it. So I'm gonna try to do that. I don't think it's gonna work with this one because I just split it, but we'll see how that works. But usually you just, with cabbage, anytime we use cabbage, we usually get the first couple of layers of leaves out, and there we go. So one thing the recipe talks about is you don't really want to have the core in there. This recipe talks about maybe quartering the cabbage. Which, there it goes. And then, I don't know, this is a pretty little one, so we may not have to quarter it. You're gonna slice it. There's lots of ways to slice the cabbage. There are big mandolin slicers that are meant to use with cabbage. You could use a food processor. You could cut it by hand, which is what I'm doing because I don't feel like getting my attachments for the mixer out. But from what I've read, you want small pieces or small ribbons of the leaf because you want a lot more surface area for all of the bacteria to develop on. So we're going to attempt to make some thin slices of cabbage. You also don't really want the core, so I'm going to try to stop before I get to the core. Make those smaller maybe. Okay. It's pretty close. And then I'll cut this way.
So Kelly's almost finished with the first cabbage, and it's gonna be a little bit of time before she's got all the cabbages cut that she needs to cut. But right now she's going to weigh the cabbage because she needs a certain amount, basically per batch.
It needs 1 3/4 pound of cabbage per jar, which is about 28 ounces. So we're gonna work our way there till we get to 28 ounces. And that is one little head, which doesn't quite make a pound. So.
Alright. So Kelly's gonna go ahead and chop a little more, and we will we'll come back here in a little bit whenever she's ready to add some salt to the cabbage for the first little batch.
Okay, so we have enough cabbage chopped up for 1 jar. It looks like a lot, but from what I've read, it should fit in this jar once it gets the brine going and it shrinks down a little bit. So the next step is to add your salt, and salt is what makes the brine. So you're just gonna add, let me get my salt open here. Oh no. This is why they have everything prepared when you watch a cooking show, so you don't have to watch somebody open a container of salt. And you want to use real salt. You want you don't want to use regular table salt or iodized salt because they typically have anti-caking agents in them, just chemicals they put in them to keep them from sticking together. And from what I've read, that can affect the brine. So what we are going to use is natural sea salt. The recipe calls for like pink Himalayan salt, something like that is fine. She also says that if you have to use, you can use like pickling salt or canning salt. But we're going to use sea salt. So we need a tablespoon And then we're gonna pour it in there. And the idea is to evenly distribute it throughout the cabbage, and you work it into the cabbage. So the salt will, as it gets worked in, it will pull out moisture from the cabbage. So, and that's another tip that I have read, is that you really want to use fresh cabbage. So you probably couldn't do this with cabbage that's been in storage all winter or something like that, because the cabbage, there's just pieces of core. That's what I'm getting out. I got a little bit too much core in there, I think. But the cabbage will dry out over time, which is okay for some things. It's okay for cooking probably, but it is not okay for this, because you just won't end up with enough brine. So work it in there. I can already see, I don't know if John can get that, there's like moisture coming out, water coming out of the cabbage. A lot of the people, I've watched several videos and read about making this because it's their first time making it, and I've seen where a lot of people just kind of massage it in there, and you essentially, you do that, and once you get it all worked in there real good, you let it sit for a little bit before you put it in the jar. And it, again, it just gets moisture out of the cabbage. So this is what we're gonna do for a little bit here. Work it all in there really good. I have read some recipes where, I guess just different recipes for cabbage or for sauerkraut, where you can add different seasonings or vegetables like carrots and things. But again, since we have never done this before, we're gonna go the nice simple route and just straight up cabbage and salt. I can see where it's like decreased in volume now too. You can see that as it's getting all worked in there.
All right, we'll come back whenever it is ready to go in the jar.
Okay, so we let this one sit about 10 minutes probably, and it has started to make a brine. If I move the cabbage out of the way, you can see there's liquid there. So the next step is to pack it into the jar. So we're gonna do that with this jar, and try my best to get it in there. That's not very easy. Maybe I need smaller bits at a time. And you want to pack it down. Pack it down in there. I'm going to use my fist for now. It's amazing that all of that cabbage is going to fit in this jar now. Because it really is. As I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it is. And look at all that brine. As you push it down in there, all of that's coming up. That's pretty cool. I'm a little fascinated right now because I've never done this, so.
You're starting to geek out a little bit.
Sauerkraut geek. Alright, I don't know if I can get my fingers in here to push it down. I'm gonna try. It's hard to make a fist at this point, but I think I can get it in there. I'm impressed. Honestly, I saw the brine on the bowl and I didn't think there was going to be enough to cover this cabbage once you get it in the jar. But if you pack it down like you're supposed to, there will be, because there's plenty left in the bowl. And once I get this all packed in, we'll pour that on top of it. So I'm impressed. how you like read a recipe and you're like, okay, maybe we'll give it a try and see if they knew what they were talking about. They did. Alright, so there is a smidge of a little liquid and some pieces of cabbage left in there in the bowl. I'm going to try to get that all in our jar. And it says you want to leave 1 to 2 inches from the top of the cabbage to the top of the jar. And that's about, we've got maybe a little over an inch and a half. Not quite 2. We don't have 2 inches, so. But again, I'm just going to make sure all that's down in there. Push it down. Alright. I have to go rinse my hand off before the next step. Okay. So we've got all of our cabbage in there. We've got the brine in there. And there's about 1.5 inches of headspace in there. We're going to wipe off the outside of the jar. And also going to, I see a few little pieces there. It's important that everything is below the brine level. So I'm going to try to get these few little pieces down in there. Okay, I think we're good. So this recipe talks about using a floaties trap, and basically that's like a layer beneath your fermentation weight over the cabbage that keeps the little pieces from floating to the top. And she talks about using a cabbage leaf that is, about the size of the jar. Unfortunately, I tore all the cabbage leaves when I tore them off, so I can't really, they have whole, tears in them, so I'm not real comfortable that it won't prevent stuff from floating up. So what we decided to use is some wax paper. So I just took the lid of the jar, or you could take the mouth of the jar itself, and I just kind of cut around the wax paper to the shape of that. So I'm going to try here. Never done this, but we'll try to put that in there. The idea is to keep it above the floaties, so let's try doing it this way. Or above the cabbage, I mean. Yeah, above the floaties. Keep that down in there. It's fine if it goes under the brine. The idea is to keep the floaties under there. And then the next step is to add your weight, which will keep the everything under the brine as well. And some that I have read, some recipes have talked about using these jars but filling them with water, and then you set that on top, which would probably work too. But then I think you have to I think if you don't use a lid, you have to check it more often, and you might have to get scum off and everything. But we're just gonna follow this recipe, which says to put the empty jar in, and it's not gonna go down all the way right now because we have a lot of brine in there, and we need to put our lid on. I think we're gonna have to dump some brine out. Let me go do that, because this is not gonna be able to get that lid on. So let me go do that real quick. Okay, so we had to take brine out. This is how much brine we had to take out, because as soon as I put that little jar in there to weigh it down, it was like gonna overflow if I pressed it down any farther. So we took some of the brine out. I have the floaty trap back in there, and I'm gonna put the jar in now, and it won't go all the way down until I put the lid on, but if I press it down, you can see now it's only going up to about the bottom of the threads. So if there's any variation in the liquid, I feel better about it not overflowing. So now we're going to put the lid on loosely. You don't want to tighten this down, because the idea is that you're letting gas escape, but you're keeping it protected from things getting inside. So there we go. So there is our jar of sauerkraut ready to ferment, and I will probably add a little label to this so I know when we set it out so I can keep track of how many weeks it's been fermenting. It should be like anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, maybe, depends on temperature and any fluctuations in the environment. From what I've read, an ideal temperature is between 65 and 70. If it gets too warm, then it can end up soft, but if it's too cold, it just won't ferment. So we'll see. We'll check on it and come back later and show you guys how it's doing, and you'll get to watch the progress of it or the failure. We'll see. I'm nervous. I'm so nervous about this, but it looks pretty right now.
And as you can see, Kelly was able to get 3 jars out of the cabbages that she processed. So now we wait and we watch it ferment, and we hopefully we'll have some very tasty sauerkraut in a few weeks. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you like this video, do the stuff down there and subscribe and like and ring the notification bell. But stay tuned, and we will give an update whenever we get further into the process of the fermentation, and we'll let you know how the sauerkraut has turned out. All right, well, like I said, thank you guys for watching. You guys have a great rest of the day, whatever day it is that you are watching this, and we will see you on the next video.